When 4-year-old Cleo Smith was kidnapped in Western Australia a few weeks ago, the world started watching the investigation unfold. Was this child a target or was she a victim of opportunity? Thanks for joining Profiling Evil for this quick review of some of the circumstances surrounding the abduction of young Cleo Smith. Thankfully, this little tyke was recovered this week by Western Australian Police Force just 3 minutes from her residential home. Now, before we get started, I hope you'll take a moment, hit the like and the subscribe button, uh, and please ring that bell so that you receive all of our notifications on videos like this one. The global community watched in horror as missing persons case Cleo Smith played out in the news. This little 4-year-old captured our hearts and our attention almost immediately. I mean, it reminded me much of the disappearance of Summer Wells here in the United States. As quickly as the case hit the airwaves, allegations began to swirl around the family as potential suspects. Social media wasn't going to be outdone, and it went crazy with theories and, in some cases, mean spirited allegations. The police made it clear from the get go that Cleo's mother and stepfather were not suspects in the case, but it just didn't matter. As one who spends a great deal of time examining behaviors, this dynamic of immediate blaming is interesting to me. Let's take a moment and talk about why we are so quick to judge, even though we don't have enough information to make informed decisions. Uh, I believe the primary reason we judge is that we personalize each case, thinking of how it would have played out based on our own life experiences and our own personal environments. I also think it has a lot to do with our own fear of being victimized, fears for ourselves, and especially as parents and grandparents of loved ones. I mentioned the Summer Wells case. I think of the firestorm that erupted when Summer Wells disappeared. Immediately, online forums began pointing fingers at her parents, perhaps in part because of the way in which they lived, the way they presented themselves, and of course, the unfolding background and family dynamics that came into everyone's attention. Hey, well, let's just get back down under to Western Australia and the Cleo Smith case. It was October 15th when Cleo's parents left their home in Carnarvon. It's about an hour drive. They were going north up to the Blowholes campground. The campground sits on the western coast of Australia and it's famous for its ocean swells, which force this incredible amount of water through sea caves, just exploding it high into the air. It's a spectacular sight, and it's an ideal place for families to picnic and to camp. The Smiths are very familiar with the campground, and they apparently visited it many times. Well, early the next morning, early morning hours, Cleo woke her mother to get a drink of water. This was the last time she was seen. Now, the family woke at about 6:30 with the child and her sleeping bag gone. She simply disappeared, still wearing that little pink and purple one-piece sleeping suit that we saw on the news. Oddly, her sleeping bag was also missing, and her mother immediately called the police. Western Australia police responded and they began conducting air, land, and sea searches in the case. They were looking for Cleo, hoping that perhaps she'd wandered off. They feared that she might have had an accident. I had so many questions in this case initially, and we had to just quickly consider, instead of this being an accident, especially with that sleeping bag missing, was it possible that this was an abduction? Now, I suspect law enforcement was working on that from the beginning, but it was necessary for the investigators to consider this from the get go. I want to take a moment and talk about Cleo's risk level. Research has shown that there are several key factors in determining a victim's level of risk. First, we have to think about whether they are victims that are high risk or low risk. Now, a high risk victim is someone that's described as maybe a drug dealer, a drug abuser, a criminal of some kind, or let's say, even a sex trade worker. By the very nature of their lifestyle, they assume a certain amount of risk. On the other hand, low risk victims might be somebody like a stay at home mom who has a close circle of friends. She doesn't hang out at bars and she isn't involved in crime. Her weekly activities might include things like lunch with her friends, going to the school and playing piano for the PTA meeting, or grocery shopping on Saturdays. Perhaps she goes to church on Sunday and she's often found in the company of only her companion, her family, and her closest friends. She's involved in low risk activities. Now, a child cared for by a concerned, loving parent or persons who are there for her protection is considered low risk. Somebody like 4-year old Cleo Smith. These risk categories were developed by the behavioral science team at the FBI many years ago. And after examining thousands of criminal cases, they continue to play out and really make good sense as we kind of think through these cases that we're witnessing. The result, the opinions suggest that statistically, high risk victims are victimized by a stranger. And this is interesting. When they become victims, they are usually injured in an opportunistic situation. The predator is an opportunistic criminal. They're taking advantage of someone who just happens to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. Now, to highlight this, let's think about a sex trade worker who's picked up by people that are unknown to them. They climb into a vehicle that is unfamiliar and they may travel to a location in which they have no control and frankly don't even know where they are. If you think about this, it's easy to see how their risk of being victimized is increasing exponentially. Now, on the opposite side of the spectrum, low risk victims like Cleo Smith, I believe, statistically, low risk victims are victimized by somebody who's known to them, and they actually are a target of that aggressive act. It is so frustrating and painful to imagine this. I mean, isn't it? Now, things get a little tricky when we look at low risk victim cases like Cleo's. I can almost guarantee that Cleo didn't know who Terrence Darrell Kelly was, but somehow he knew her. And that's what's so dang frightening. Cleo Smith lives in a loving home. There are no indications of abuse or neglect. She lives with her mother, her stepfather, and her baby sister. She has a dad who loves her. The family has a stable home life in their community and they enjoy time together as a family. I could find no indication of drug or alcohol abuse, and I suspect some of you may find something that you send to me, but there's no domestic violence that I've seen or other criminal activity in the family. By all rights, Cleo is safe and sound when she's with her family and at her home. But her circumstances changed when the family traveled to the east and then up to the north to the Blowholes Park. Now, there's nothing wrong with the park, and it's certainly as safe as any other place, but it's not as safe as their home. I hope you're understanding that. The family, again, has camped here many times before. It's familiar to her family. Cleo and her family undoubtedly, once they got there, played on the beaches, walked the trails. They may have frequented the shops. Everywhere they would have gone, they would have traveled in places where predators could also be. Now, this causes me to wonder when this initial contact between Terrence Kelly and Cleo Smith occurred. It's possible that it happened just seconds before she was abducted. He could have been out prowling around, committing thefts, peeking, and stumbled upon this child and quickly reacted, abducting her. But that seems less likely to me. I think he probably noticed Cleo playing on the beach or again, walking on the trails. He started fantasizing about her and he started putting his plan in motion. The initial contact site was most likely someplace hours earlier. But it makes me think, what if the initial contact site actually occurred 70 kilometers to the south in the residential neighborhood they lived in? Was this family, this child, stalked locally, followed to the beach, and then Cleo was abducted? I think, again, this is less likely, but it's something we have to consider. Either way, Cleo's risk level increased as her situation, circumstance, and environment changed. Now, to recap, Cleo's risk level at home was low. It increased as her environment and circumstances changed. As nighttime fell, her risk began climbing even more. Now, Kelly had the benefit of planning and concealment. Once Cleo and her family were asleep, the predator quietly picked up the child, sleeping bag and all, and slipped into the night. Can you imagine how terrifying this was for this child when she and her parents, I might add, awoke the next morning? Holy cow. Well, I hope this explanation helps you understand the victim risk continuum just a little better. I'm really interested in whether you think Cleo Smith was a victim of opportunity or whether she was a target. Please take a moment, explain why you've come to this decision you made. I'm going to be really interested in reading your comments down below. Now, in the beginning of this video, I spoke of our tendency as people to unfairly judge, to develop a theory when we have no facts. I guess it's normal for us to consider possible suspects in these kinds of cases. Cleo fit the mold of a low risk victim. And because of that, statistically, it would suggest that she fell victim to someone who knew her and that she was a target of that aggressive act. But again, her circumstance, environment, and situation changed all that. While some people were pointing fingers at her parents and filling online forums with conspiracy theories, an Australian news agency increased the stakes by painting an Aboriginal man named Terry as Cleo's abductor. His life was immediately shattered, and it would be some time before Channel 7 and Sunrise News withdrew the photo of Terry and issued an apology. I mean, imagine what we're doing when we falsely accuse. With Cleo's safe recovery, I want to congratulate Western Australia Police Force. I personally reached out to a number of commanders that I know there, and I congratulated them and thanked them for pulling this off. It's going to be really interesting to learn more about the initial contact site where Kelly chose Cleo as his next victim. Was it at the beach or near their home? I mean, think about it. They only lived 3 minutes apart from each other in their Carnarvon homes. Is this going to be some kind of a wild coincidence, or is it an element of this crime that suggests premeditation and targeting? Well, I'm going to be looking for your comments down below on this question. I want to know how you feel about online judging, too. Are we helping or hurting in these investigations? Are we hurting victims, extended victims, and perhaps our own moral fabric? Well, the only thing I'm convinced of right now is that people like Terry and Cleo's parents were clearly hurt and wrongly accused. Hey, thanks for listening to Profiling Evil, and thanks for your support. If you like this video, please hit the like and the subscribe button over there. Ring the bell so that you receive all of our videos like this one. And if you're looking for a good Christmas gift idea, please consider my books, Deceived, an investigative memoir of the Zion Society cult, and She Knew No Fear. You can get a great deal at profilingevil.com. Thanks again, and we'll see you soon at the next crime scene.